Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Should be a great conversation here tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's just have a good chat. I got plenty on my mind, got a few things to get me going. I'm sure you all have questions, so let's go.
American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses. We need a government of action. All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So the way this works, for those of you who may not be familiar, is I tend to give opening remarks. And as I give those opening remarks, I do what I just did right now. I write down super chats as they come in. I give my opening remarks for the first little bit of the show. And then after that, I do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, I just answer questions for the rest of the night. And that is how our show works here. That's how our show works. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat. Super chats are what make the second half of the show exciting. If you all don't send questions, I don't have much to talk about. But sometimes you guys ask those questions that get me going. And sometimes we're on here for 3, almost 4 hours sometimes because guys just keep me asking great questions. So that's really awesome. If you guys got good questions, be sure to ask them. Quick couple business announcements before we get too far into this. On Friday, we will have our next patrons only stream. So if you want to be part of our patrons community, you get books sent to you. When CPI publishes a new book, we send it to you. And you get to be part of our patrons only streams. Sign up on the Patreon. We would like to have you as part of our Patreon community. So that should be awesome. So if you want to be part of the Patreon community surrounding this channel, support the work that we do, by all means, sign up. The next thing that I just want to throw out there, worth mentioning, is that if you want to be a member of the Center for Political Innovation, membership remains open. Anyone can join on the website. And we are planning a big event for March 25th. March 25th, 2023. We are going to be having an awesome event. Location to be announced. But if you want to be part of the planning and you want to be part of the Center for Political Innovation and its activities, you can join on the website. So check that out. Another quick announcement while we're at it. Peter Coffin has a new documentary that is really tremendous. It is about degrowth and Malthusianism and the lie of overpopulation. It's a really, really important piece, and it's really good. It is really, really good. So if you haven't had a chance to watch it, by all means, please watch it. People need to see this because the idea that somehow we want everyone to be poorer, somehow the problem isn't capitalism, it's just there's too many people in the world, somehow the idea that growth is bad, that's bullshit. And Peter Coffin rips it to shreds with hard data. I'm dropping the link in the chat right now for this very important documentary. Just drop the link in the chat. So go check out Peter Coffin's great documentary. Just wanted to throw that out there. Those are the only business announcements I was going to make here. So I guess for my opening remarks, I'll just jump into the opening remarks. Keep in mind, I'm writing super chats down this whole time. So if you have a super chat, you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, shoot me that super chat. I will write it down. So my opening remarks tonight, I wanted to talk about a couple things I've come across lately. I had an interesting reaction to this tweet. I don't know if people saw this. This is from the GOP, the Republican Party. The Republican Party tweeted out 60% of workers report living paycheck to paycheck. And that's true. That is true. 60% of American wage workers do not have any savings. They live paycheck to paycheck. They are struggling to pay their bills. That's an interesting super chat. Writing it down. Very good question, Johnny Blaze. That's a good one. Wrote it down. But, 60% of American workers report living paycheck to paycheck. Now, this tweet has gotten an interesting reaction. Many people have pointed out that there are policies the Republican Party has promoted, such as opposing labor unions, such as opposing the raising of the minimum wage, that have contributed to this situation. However, I think the fact that we saw this on a Republican Party aligned account is a sign of the times. I think Jenny Lynn has it. It's such a weird time to be alive. I want to tell you all a little story. There was one time in my life, I was considering being a teacher. And so my senior year of high school, I took a college-level post-secondary course in education. And it was offered at the community college. I got high school credit and college credit for the course. And I was learning to be a teacher, right? I didn't end up becoming a teacher. I've never been a teacher. But I took an education course. And I was learning from, college professors, my senior year of high school, about the kind of things that teachers have to learn in order to be teachers. And I was in this really, really small town at the time, really small town that was almost 95% Republican. Everyone was conservative. And this was, of course, in the early years of the 21st century. This was before the economic crisis, before the Wall Street meltdown of 2008, when the U.S. economy was still pretty strong in comparison to how it is now. And when you're in a really small town like the one I was in, you're in the same classes with people all throughout the day, right? And some of the same people that were in my college AP government class, my high school AP government class, were also in this post-secondary college level education course learning to be teachers with me. And I remember in my high school AP government class, we talked a lot and we debated a lot about political issues. And one of the things that so many of the people I was in town with that were conservative and Republican, so many of them insisted that poverty was not a problem. And it was weird because there were people who went to my school who grew up in trailers. There were kids who didn't have phones. They'd ask them for their parents' phone number and they're like, we don't have a phone in our house. There was certainly poverty in my little town. But regardless, these folks were all Republicans and they were adamant that poverty was not a real thing. Poverty was made up. Poverty was not a problem in America. Anyone could do well in America if they just worked hard. Poor people are just lazy. Welfare and social programs are how people are ripping off the system. Poverty was just not real. That was what I heard from the conservative folks I grew up around. They were just adamant that poverty was not a problem. Anyone could work hard, etc. So we'd had this argument. And I remember this one particular girl. She was just adamant that poverty was not a problem in America. People can get by. People can just work hard. This idea that there's a problem with poverty in America. It's just a lie. We don't need food stamps. People who get food stamps are ripping off the system. She's been at the grocery store. She'd seen how they don't buy healthy food, and they rip off the taxpayers with their food stamps. She was just adamant that poverty wasn't a problem. Poverty didn't exist. Poor people all deserve it. Why don't the unemployed people all just get jobs? She was just adamant that, and that was the Republican Party line back then, was that poverty was not real. Poverty was, there is no poverty in America, right? All the poor people are just whining and complaining. That was the standard Republican Party line. This is before 2008 when people all lost their houses. This is before, you had the big problems that we had later. And there was just this standard Republican Party argument that poverty, all the poor people are just whining, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've repeated myself, but if you remember those years, that's how the neoconservative Bush era Republican Party talked, right? Is that poverty was not a real problem. So I remember this same girl who would always argue in the government class that poverty didn't exist. We, of course, were learning to be teachers. And when you're learning to be a teacher, you have to learn about different things. Teachers, you have to be aware of, like students being from different backgrounds. And one of the things we had to be aware of, it is required, I think by law, you have to teach teachers, is that poverty affects the ability of children to learn. Children from lower economic backgrounds, because of their conditions and the conditions that they live in, their ability to learn is affected, right? And it affects brain development. Poverty, if a child grows up in poverty, it can scar them for their whole life. And we are required to learn about this. So I'm sitting in this education class, and this professor is just, clicking through the next slides of her PowerPoint, explaining how children that grow up in poverty, children in low-income families, it affects them their whole life. It affects their brain development. It affects all these things. And this girl who's sitting across from me in the classroom and is just adamant that poverty doesn't exist, she's getting red in her face. And she's hearing the statistics, and it's just like, click, next statistic. And they're talking about how low-income children, have the problems that low-income children have, how, food insecurity in America. It's just like, click. Oh, there you go. There went my pen. That was wild. But anyway, click, and, going through the slides, just showing the reality of poverty. All these things that she insisted. It was just the Republican Party line. Poverty's not real. Poor people are just whining and complaining. They'd say America has the richest poor people in the world. They'd say all this stuff, right? That poverty, there couldn't be anything. All the food stamps programs and welfare is all just a big ripoff. And she was sitting there and just hearing the statistics. Just over and over. She's hearing all these statistics about poverty. And she's looking, she's got, this look on her face. She's just quite disturbed to hear all this because, this just goes against everything she's been taught to believe. So then we get to the next slide, and the professor starts talking about the Head Start program, which is, it's like daycare that's provided to low-income families. And they're talking about the Head Start program and how Head Start, it's this government program to provide daycare to low-income children. The teacher just starts talking about, the professor's talking about Head Start. And so this girl, out of the blue, keep in mind, I didn't say anything in this class. I'm just sitting there. And the whole time she's like getting red in the face. She's getting agitated. This just can't be. There can't be poverty in America. There can't be lack of opportunity to children who grew up in low-income families. This can't be. She's just getting upset, and she's looking over at me. I'm not saying anything. I'm just sitting there, right? And so finally we get to the last slide, and the teacher's talking about the Head Start program, and the teacher's talking about school lunches and different programs that exist. So this girl shoots her hands up, and she raises her hand. And she says to the professor, so what you're saying is the help is there, and it's their fault if they don't get it. And she says it with this very angry look on her face. So what you're saying is that the help is there, and it's their own fault if they don't get it. And the professor gives kind of a neutral answer, like, yes, we do have programs. So then this girl turns to me and shouts, see, I told you America wasn't evil, Caleb. I'll never forget that moment, right? That shows you how determined people are to hold on to their beliefs. When reality doesn't conform to what they've been told. And she was sitting there and just hearing statistic after statistic after statistic. And then finally, the end, they're talking about social programs. then, oh, there's a reason. And then she'd shout, so angry that I had gotten into her head and caused her to question her beliefs, right? That is how people can be sometimes. People really want to keep believing things. It can be very hard to convince people to believe other than what they believe. And she was just, and people in the class looked at her like, Caleb didn't say anything. What's wrong with her? But she shouts at me from across the room, see, Caleb, America's not evil. And she was quite fired up. And that was quite an educational moment for me. And that's why I find it amusing. Let's pull this tweet up again. I'll pull it up again. We'll pull this tweet up again. That's why I find it amusing that this tweet is out there, right? That this tweet is there, right? Because this was not a Republican tweet. This was not a Republican tweet during the Bush years. This was the Democrat tweet during the Bush years. This was a Democratic Party tweet during the Bush years. Now this is a Republican tweet. You have to wonder, like, why is the Republican Party making tweets like this? The party that said, John Stossel, who's a big Republican libertarian, he used to do stories about how poverty doesn't exist, about how he went to the lowest income, district or something of an urban area, and all the people there had TVs, so therefore poverty isn't real. This was standard. There was no poverty in America. And like anyone who knows anything about America knows that's not true. There's been, hungry stomachs in Appalachia. Go to the rural South, go to Mississippi, go to Alabama, look at the communities of the rural South, go outside of Atlanta, Georgia, go into the rural areas of Georgia, and you are going to see poverty. And go to urban areas, go to the east side of Cleveland, go to the Bronx, the Bronx in New York City, the poorest county in the United States. I mean, there is poverty all over America. Yeah, we have a big middle class, and that middle class used to be much bigger. We had prosperous suburbs, etc. But, we've always had poverty in America. Right? You go to the rural areas of Oklahoma, go to South Texas, go to East Texas, right? Now you can go to Skid Row in Los Angeles. There has always been poverty in America. And even in the best of times, there was always a section of America that got left behind, folks who have been in the military, they always talk about how in the military, it's country music and rap. It's low-income African-American folks, and it's low-income white folks, right? It's country music and rap. That's what they've got in the U.S. military. And that there has always been poverty in America. And generally, it has been the Democrats who are the ones that make noise like they want to do something about it. And it's the Republicans who go, oh, let them eat cake. Oh, the poor people need to get a job. We need free market. If you care about the poor people, that's called communism. That's communism. You want to give poor people food? That's communism. You want workers in factories to have union representation? That's communism. Why, the next thing you know, we'll have Stalin and they'll kill millions of people. That's why we can't do such a thing, right? It was Republicans that were the ones that, Republicans were the ones that were in denial about poverty, and Democrats were the ones that acted like they wanted to do something about it. Lyndon Johnson was the guy who waged the war on poverty. Folks ever hear about that? The Johnson administration. Lyndon Johnson waged war on poverty. He was the president of the United States, not a particularly nice fellow. He took the presidency after JFK was assassinated, but his platform was, Lyndon Johnson, I'm going to declare war on poverty. He was a Southern guy, and that was what he was all about. It's quite interesting, but you'll notice that the Democratic Party doesn't really talk that way anymore. And it's weird because the Democratic Party has become, as we're all told now, the Democratic Party is much further, quote unquote, to the left than it used to be. That's what we're told, at least. The Democratic Party is much further to the left than ever before. Right? Bernie Sanders, openly a socialist, was the second place Democratic primary candidate in 2020 and 2016. National health care. Most Democrats favor, creating some kind of single payer health care system. The Democrats are supposed to be so far left now. But you'll notice that This is the tweet coming from the Republican Party. It's very interesting. The Democrats are so far left, we're told. The Democrats are so far left, but what does that really mean? Well, Caleb, the way we understand it is there's this thing called the far right wing, and that's called fascism. That's like Hitler. And then there's this thing called the far left, and that's called communism. And America is great because it's neither fascist nor communist. We just believe in freedom, and we're right in the middle. And if we get too far left, that's communism. And if we get too far right, that's fascism. But in America, we've got this great golden center. We believe in the free market. We have things like the post office, and we've got things like Social Security. But we also have it so people can start businesses, and we have low taxes. And, that's the line, right? Too far left is communism. Too far right is fascism. And America is great because we're neither. We're right in the middle. We're the sensible, liberal, free world. We're liberal Democrats setting the constitutional liberty, Western style, showing the world the benefits of the Western liberal way of thinking, individualism, etc. However, if far left means closer to communism, and the Democratic Party has moved so far left, why is this coming out of the Republican Party? And why is the Democratic Party no longer expressing concern over these things? When people say that the Democratic Party is the far left party nowadays, in some ways, they are very right. There are issues that used to be considered fringe that are now standard among Democrats. Drag Queen Story Hour. If you had proposed Drag Queen Story Hour 10 years ago, the Democratic Party mostly would have been against it. Republicans would have been solidly against it. Now we're told that anyone who so much as mentions Drag Queen Story Hour on their streams, like I just did, must be a Nazi. Now, I have no issue with trans people, and trans people are welcome to work with me and all of that. But, the fact that all through middle America, there's a lot of people that are just not okay with, drag queens doing story hour with kids. That is now a reason that Democrats, not only Democrats are for that, but if you're not for that, you must be the same as Hitler. You must be the same as a Nazi. That is the tone in the Democratic Party. Now, the Democratic Party is also the party that talks a lot about white privilege. They talk a lot about white privilege and how America was founded on racism and white people have it too good. And all of Trump's supporters are a basket of deplorables of these white people. And no, it's not that their living conditions are getting worse. They're just losing their privilege. That's what Ilhan Omar said. They're just losing their privilege. White people need to be poorer, etc. And so as the Democratic Party gets further left, they've also stopped being the party that's concerned about economic justice. And in fact, if you are concerned about economic justice, they have a word for you. Did you know that? There's a word for you. If you are actually concerned about economic justice, you are a class reductionist. You are a class reductionist if you are concerned about poverty. We'll all remember how Jimmy Dore got canceled because of Force the Vote. He said now is the time in the middle of a pandemic to go demand that we have an up-down vote on Medicare for all. And he demanded that AOC not vote for Nancy Pelosi unless she agrees to have an up-down vote on Medicare for all. And what did they say about Jimmy Dore? How dare he? He's a fascist. A white man is demanding that a woman of color who was elected promising Medicare for all, actually fulfill her promises? He's a fascist. He's a Nazi. He's a Nazbol. I mean, it was like, he's a red brown. It was like a crime against humanity that Jimmy Dore said, hey, Democrats, we all voted for you because we wanted Medicare for all. Why don't you actually go fight for that? You see, Medicare for all doesn't have anything to do with Drag Queen Story Hour. And Medicare for all doesn't have anything to do with why white people have it too good and need to be punished. Right? Medicare for all would benefit all working class Americans, and the Democratic Party is no longer interested in bringing working class Americans together to fight for their own interests. The Democratic Party is in the interests of inciting sections of the working class against other sections of the working class and polarizing the United States so they can enhance the police state and make all Americans poorer. That's what the Democratic Party is about. And if you actually want to fight in the interests of all Americans, not only are you a class reductionist, you are a populist. And that's the worst thing you can be, a populist. I mean, if you're a populist, you're the same as a Nazi. You're the same as Hitler, practically, if you're a populist. But I'll let you all in on something weird. Bill Clinton, who was the Democrat president for 8 years, from the Democrat Party, he was president. For 8 years, Bill Clinton was president. And Bill Clinton's entire oratory style, his entire career, was based on Southern populism. Did you know this? Bill Clinton came from the tradition of what they called Southern populism. He was from a little place called Hope. He was the former governor of Arkansas, and he learned an oratory style and a tradition called Southern populism. And actually, folks, I'm going to remind you about somebody that you've probably, at this point, if you're younger than I am, you've probably never even heard of this person. And if you're older than me, you've probably already forgotten him. Right? This person I'm about to show you, right? This is somebody who has just been erased from America's political memory. He's just been scratched from history. It's like he never existed. I had to dig through YouTube to find his YouTube videos. But this individual used to be a big superstar in the Democratic Party. Until 2008, this guy was, many people thought he might be the next president of the United States.
I want to start,
Does people know who this is? This is John Edwards. This guy was a Democrat frontrunner. He was John Kerry's running mate. In 2004, the Democrats ran John Kerry for president and this guy for vice president. And he was number 3 in the presidential election in the Democratic primary of 2008. It was Hillary Clinton was right behind Barack Obama. And then right behind Hillary Clinton was this guy, John Edwards. And listen to John Edwards.
I can, by talking about the two Americas, which some of you have heard me talk about in the past, and which are still alive and thriving in this country. But I want to be clear, when I'm talking about two Americas, I'm not just talking about the difference between the rich and the poor. I'm talking about the very rich and everybody else.
Boom!
That's the two Americas.
Boom! What did he just say there? He said, when I talk, I'm not talking about the rich versus the poor. I'm talking about the very rich versus everybody else. Boom. Boom. And that's why you've never heard of John Edwards. Because among the Frankfurt School intersectionality crowd, the reason that they use this term class reductionist is whenever they talk about economic issues, they don't see it in Marxist terms. In Marxist terms, we say what John Edwards just said. There are those who own the means of production, those who own the banks, factories, and industries, those who own the centers of economic power, and everybody else. And all of us who work for a wage are part of the working class. And there's this other class called the owning class, the capitalist class, and that is who we're in a struggle against. But that is not how the intersectionality crowd, that is not how the Frankfurt School, how the postmodernist academic people talk about income inequality. See, they say, well, there's different ways that someone can be oppressed, Caleb. Someone can be oppressed because of their skin and their race. Someone can be oppressed because of their gender. Someone can be oppressed because of their disability. Someone can be oppressed because of their sexual orientation. And ultimately, also, someone can be oppressed because of their income level. You see, if you have like 10% more income than someone else, you can't relate to them. And so that gives you income privilege. Some people in America have like income privilege over other people. Oh my God. And it's like not fair. Like, you know, you have income privilege. The way the intersectional crowd talks about income inequality, they don't talk about it in Marxist terms of the owning class versus the working class. They talk about it in a way to incite members of the wage working class against each other. Don't get mad at the capitalists. Get mad at people who have 5%, 10% more than you have. Get resentful about the people that had slightly more opportunity than you. That's the way they frame things. There's different forms of oppression, Caleb. There's racism, and there's sexism, and there's homophobia, and there's transphobia, and then there's classism. And that's like one of them. But the problem with you communists is you think that only classism matters. And you're wrong, okay? There's racism, there's sexism, there's homophobia, there's transphobia. Oh my God. And you're a class reductionist. No, we're not class reductionists. No. When we talk about class, we're not talking about income level. And we're not talking about the fact that people who have 10% more, 50% more even have different opportunities. This isn't a privilege conversation. I never want to hear about privilege again because I'll let you all in on a little secret. Do you know what the definition of privilege is? I'm going to read you the definition of privilege. This is the definition of privilege. This is why we should stop talking about privilege. A privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted, available only to a particular person. And the example sentence is, education is a right, not a privilege. The definition of a privilege is that it is something you are not entitled to. You are not entitled to a privilege. A privilege is not a right. A right is something that you are entitled to. But a privilege is something that can be given and taken away. And when the conversation starts to be about privilege, suddenly it slips away from the notion that people have rights. Education is not a privilege, it's a right. Healthcare is not a privilege, it's a right. Employment is a privilege, is a right, not a privilege. Not getting shot for reaching into your wallet should be a basic human right, not a privilege. The things that people of color endure on the basis of being people of color are not things that any human being should ever have to endure. No one should get shot for reaching for their wallet. So not getting shot for reaching for your wallet is not a privilege. It is a right. Not getting discriminated against in the hiring process is not a privilege. It is a right. Having access to education and healthcare, having an opportunity to feel safe in your own neighborhood, all these things that we consider to be white privilege are in reality a violation of the rights of people of color. But if you don't frame them as that, if you don't frame it as racism violates the rights of some working class people, sexism violates the rights of some working class people, transphobia, homophobia violates the rights of some working class people. If you don't frame it that way, if you instead say, well, some people have privilege, some people have privilege, some people have privilege, what is the answer? Take that privilege away. That's what the answer is. And that's what Ilhan Omar openly admitted. When she said that white workers were rallying around Trump, she said they're just mad they're losing their privilege. She's happy that they're poor. Right? Well, I think that access to jobs, healthcare, and education, access to decent employment, these kind of things aren't things that white people had and are now losing access to because of some kind of privilege. These are things that all people should enjoy. These are human rights. But if you make it about privilege, it's no longer a struggle to stop the suppression of some in order to raise everyone up. Suddenly it becomes a conversation about who has it too good and needs to get knocked down. That's how the Democratic Party now thinks. That's how the Democratic Party now thinks. Brandy discussed anything but class leftism, and I'm going to write that down. But even the way they talk about class, they think class means income level, and they think it's yet another category of oppression. And they don't understand that it's defined by relationship to the means of production. There's the capitalist class versus the working class. They don't get it. Let's listen to John Edwards. Let's talk about why you've never heard of John Edwards or you haven't heard of him since 2008.
There are so many things that we can do. For those people who say, oh, we fought a war on poverty, we can't change this. Oh, yeah, we can. I got more confidence in America than those people do. I know we can change it. Some of the things are pretty simple. Making work pay, for example. People who are working, they ought to earn a decent living wage so they can support their families. We ought to strengthen the law, reform the law, and strengthen the right to organize unions in the workplace so workers have a voice. Here's another thing we can do. We don't save anything in America. We have a negative savings rate, worst savings rate in the industrialized world, particularly for lower income families. If we teach financial literacy, if we set up bank accounts for them and match what they're able to save, so they have a reason to save, and we combine that with a national predatory lending law that cracks down on predatory and payday lenders.
Ooh. What did he just say? A predatory lending law that cracks down on payday lenders, that cracks down on those mortgage guys who ended up crashing the U.S. economy. Interesting. Regulate the bankers.
This strengthens the financial security of Americans. Health care, access to college, a decent living wage, making sure people can save, making sure people have a home to live in, decent affordable housing. All of these things are important pieces to building one America where everybody has a chance. It's just that simple. You know, when people ask me why I'm running for president, I can honestly say it in one sentence, so that everybody has the kind of chance that I've had. You know, I came from nothing, I now have everything. And sometimes I get reporters who ask me, they say, I don't understand why you're out talking about the poor. How can somebody with your resources talk about the poor? I don't claim to be poor. But does that mean I can't speak out for people who don't have a voice? Does that mean I can't stand up for the disabled, the disenfranchised, the poor? Well, listen, I'm here to tell you, whenever you do that, you're going to get attacked. Every time you do it, you're going to get attacked. It's always true in American history because people who have wealth and power, they do not want to hear this. They want this message to be squelched, and so they try to kill the messenger. In this case, that's me. Let me just say this very directly. They are not going to kill this voice. As long as I'm alive and breathing, I am going to stand up for people who need somebody to speak to them.
And that last bit is particularly telling. John Edwards was a huge hit with crowds, a huge hit with the crowds. Polls showed that Americans really liked what he had to say. He was really popular. Very popular. He's much more articulate than Bernie Sanders, much more charismatic than Bernie Sanders. And he just discovered that this Southern populist formula, he's from North Carolina. He was a regular Democrat, but he realized that, hey, Southern populism works. And he probably listened to a lot of Bill Clinton speeches, listened to a lot of Lyndon Johnson and other famous Southern politicians. Probably listened to some Huey Long, and he said, you know what? I'm going to be the class struggle guy. And polls showed he did pretty well. Edwards came in second in the Iowa caucuses, beating Hillary Clinton. Yep, I remember very well. And then we found out that he cheated on his wife. Well, that's shitty. I mean, that's, but that's also, that's between him and his wife. That's not our business, right? That's not a public issue, right? We don't know the details of his marriage. We don't know what was going on in his private life. But just to show you how much they really went after him. Do people generally go to jail for cheating on their wife in the United States? Is that a crime? Do people get arrested for cheating on their wives? No. No, they don't. No, they don't. They generally don't get arrested. They don't get arrested for cheating on their wives. However, John Edwards, not only did he get disgraced in a national scandal that the media just ran with, and they just played up this national scandal. Oh my God, he cheated on his wife. What a bad person. He cheated on his wife. He's a bad dude. I mean, Bill Clinton cheated on his wife. JFK cheated on his wife like every night at the White House. There's a lot of corrupt politicians. I mean, how many of them were visiting Epstein's island, for Christ's sakes, right? Anyhow, they played this up. John Edwards cheated on his wife. Shitty thing to do to his wife. But that's his private life, not our business. But then, and here's the catch, they prosecuted him for campaign finance wrongdoings and argued that some of the money that had been donated to his campaign was used to help cover up cheating on his wife. And they tried to put him in federal prison because they alleged that some of the money in his campaign was used in activities that were intended to protect him from a national scandal that weren't technically included in the campaign. What? What? Huh? What? And it's pretty, writing it down. Pretty hard to get acquitted in federal court in the United States. Federal prosecutors, there are rarely ever acquittals in federal court. But the charges against John Edwards in his federal trial were so flimsy that they were not actually able to put him in jail. They dragged him into federal court for cheating on his wife just to keep it in the news, and they tried to convict him, and they couldn't convict him in federal court for misusing funds to cover up cheating on his wife. Now, generally, there are many politicians that have sex scandals. Many of them throughout history have had sex scandals. But how many of them Do they find some weird long hoop financial loophole through which to prosecute them in federal court, and then that doesn't even stick because it's so ridiculous? They canceled him, right? It's like what's the old expression? They killed him dead. They say that in cowboy movies, right? Where they don't just kill somebody, they like super kill them, right? They just so they didn't just kill his career with a sex scandal. They like tried to throw him in jail. They stomped on John Edwards. He was not allowed to do that anymore. He was too popular. He beat Hillary Clinton in Iowa. He was more popular than Obama in some areas, and they just stomped on John. They did sex scandal, and he spent a lot of money on a haircut. He spent so much money on a haircut and federal charges. We're going to prosecute him in federal. And they just, you're not allowed to have this. This guy can't exist. He can't exist. He's not calling for national health care, but he's talking the way he's talking. He's talking populism, 99%, 1%, class struggle. We cannot have this. We need intersectionality. We need to incite workers against each other. We cannot have this message. And they drove him out of politics for good. Now he's practicing law. He has a law firm. His daughter works there. They drove him out of politics for talking this way. And the Democratic Party basically has erased its history. They used to be the party of populism, of Huey Long, Dennis Kucinich. Not no more. No. Now the Democratic Party is the party of Kamala Harris. It is the party of Joe Biden. It's the party of AOC. And it's the party of, if you care about the broad masses of Americans, if you're a populist, you're a Nazi, it's the party of special interests. Let me remind you all, once again, what the Communist Manifesto says. I always want to read it to you, because it's a quote that scares the living hell out of people that have views that are contrary. Most communists, if you were to present them with this quote, wouldn't even know what to make of it. Wouldn't even know what to make of it. And I keep bringing this quote up on these lives because it is so important. This is Karl Marx. All previous historical movements were movements of minorities, or in the interests of minorities. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority in the interest of the immense majority. Marxism is a populist movement. All previous historical movements were movements of minorities, or in the interest of minorities. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority in the interest of the immense majority. Now tell me, and I'm writing it down, tell me, do you feel like the Democratic Party is fighting for the immense majority and in the interest of the immense majority? I don't think they are. However, the Republican Party just decided to remind us with a tweet that the immense majority of American workers, are living paycheck to paycheck. 60% of American workers, the immense majority, are living paycheck to paycheck. And if somebody doesn't fight for them, who will? If the Democratic Party doesn't fight for them, somebody else will. The populist candidate usually wins the Iowa caucus. That's why the DNC decided to change the schedule now. I'm writing that down. That's a good point. So there you have it, folks. But also, I want to thank John McCarthy for this, because this is a video from the great former Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
They're entitled to their own opinions, but when you have people in positions of power in this country who deny the existence of objective truth, as they are, then where's the floor? Where's the guardrails? Where's the ceiling? How do you measure anything? Well, it's like, okay, well, whatever's true is whatever they say is true. But then what happens when they're gone and the next person or group of people come in, or the next party, and then what if they don't agree with what that group says is true or false? And so and then you couple that with the fear factor and cancel culture and people literally seeing what happens to people like me, where you just say like, hey, well, this is what's happening. And it's crazy. It's insane. And then I get called all kinds of names and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of attacks. And so no wonder so many people are afraid to do the equivalent of like, yeah, obviously the emperor has no clothes. Like, we can all see it. And there's a lot of concern about what's happening, but so few people feel like they have the ability to speak up without being worried about losing their job, or being shunned by friends or family members, or being like that crazy person. And so this is kind of one thing that's been interesting and hope inspiring is I put out this kind of long and in-depth statement talking about some of these very specific examples of what's wrong with today's Democrat Party. And I've been hearing from a lot of people I know, a lot of people I don't know, in person, on social media, people just saying like in a really serious and heavy kind of way, thank you for bringing voice to the things that I've been feeling and been frustrated with, but haven't been able to give voice to. And so my hope is that, the more we speak up, the more people feel as though they can speak up. And how do we protect people? How do we protect our freedoms that are under attack? By exercising them.
Yeah, that's Tulsi Gabbard describing how basically Americans are tired of the cancel culture. They're tired of not being able to just say what's on their minds and engage and have a conversation without fear of their life being destroyed. They're tired of the way people get targeted for just saying what's right in front of their eyes. I'm afraid to even tell you what I mean, right? If I were to go into detail about what I'm talking about, this channel might get taken down. So I can't even tell you what I mean, but I think you can all guess. There are certain topics I can't talk about here on YouTube. And if I told you about it, I might get my channel taken down. And those are topics where you're not allowed to say what's right in front of your face. There are things that seem very obvious that you're not allowed to say because the ruling elite, the Silicon Valley fascists and their minions, have decided we're not allowed to talk about them. There are certain issues that are just off limits, and it's getting to be a bit much. Americans are getting tired of it. The woke cancel culture that believes in degrowth and driving down the population, that wants all Americans to be poorer, that wants a more tightly controlled, system in order to grind the country into poverty, that wants an all-out war against Russia and China, that wants, widespread censorship and cancel culture to punish dissidents. People don't want this fascism. People don't want this high-tech degrowth fascism that the Democratic Party is pushing in the name of wokeness. People don't want it. People do not want it. People don't want it. And right now, the Republicans seem to be the only people that are giving voice to that. But then that kind of leads the Republicans to making strange tweets like the one we just saw. Because the people who are mad about the cancel culture and the people who are mad about the throttle on public discourse and people who are mad about not being able to speak their minds are also the people that are mad about not being able to make ends meet, about living paycheck to paycheck. And we may get a situation where the Republican Party turns into a catch-all populist party, where the Bernie crowd and anyone who's got economic populist feelings ends up in the Republican Party, and the Democrats just become the party of defending the status quo. And it may be It may be what's coming. I mean, it'll take a long time. Right now, the Republican Party is still very much the right-wing party, the free market party. But it's a situation where, I mean, it seems like the Republican Party is going up against the status quo. They're more and more becoming the party that's critical of the FBI. They're more and more becoming the party that's critical of the mainstream media. They're more and more becoming the party that wants there to be less censorship. They're more and more becoming the party that's critical of U.S. wars. So this is an interesting moment. And we are living in a very, very strange time in American politics. I'll just tell you that much. I will just tell you that much. But welcome, everybody. Those are my opening remarks for tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I'm going to start calling people out as I see you. Names and locations. And we'll move to start answering super chat questions after we do our roll call. So names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. We'll find out who's on the other side of the camera, who's watching this in their home tonight, who's with us tonight. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? Very strange times indeed, says Jenny Lynn. Ryan in Oakland. Rupert Fellows in England. Stephen Ann in Georgia. Welcome, welcome. Temple City, California. Tom in Kansas City, Missouri. St. David's, Bermuda. Colin in Greensboro. JT24 in Mississippi. Jamie in St. Paul. Saverio in Mexico. John McCarthy in Chicago. Edwin in the Philippines. Jared from Virginia. Jared from Virginia. Jonathan from Los Angeles. Chester, England. Kieran from San Diego is with us. Alex from Brazil. Carl in Washington. Jenny, the city of Jenny Lynn. Juan in Ecuador. Cleveland Pirate Alex is with us. Curtis from Houston, Texas. When you're in Texas, look behind you, because that's where Curtis is going to be. Anyway, Mike in Maryland. Patch in Arizona. The Dominion of Canada. Oh, Canada, our home and native land. Anyhow, David in China. Combate in Boston. You got some great tweets there, Combate. I am watching you and retweeting you. You're doing great stuff on social media. I don't know who you are, Combate, but you're doing good stuff up there in Boston. We got James Lizer in Ontario, Canada. We got Ishmael Lopez in Los Angeles. We got John Whitty in Houston. Micah in Las Vegas. David in China. Very, very good. Who else is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Brian in Boston. We got Sage Rage in Utah. I've heard Bernie was likely blackmailed. I'm writing that down. All right. Who else is with us? Max the Sax is in East Berlin. It's late over there, Max. What are you doing up this late? Right? There you go. We got Pam McCoy in Rileyville, Virginia. We got Killian in Milwaukee. Very, very good. Very, very good. Anyone else? Names and locations? If not, we will jump into answering super chat questions. If anyone else has anything they want me to talk about, super chats are always appreciated. We got someone in Seattle, hell. Come on. The Pacific Northwest is a paradise. I was just out there this summer. It's a great place. Just rains a lot. That's all. Bendu from Delaware. Bendu is awesome. Go and subscribe to American Autopsy. We had a great chat. We got Gavin in the Midwest. We never have anyone from the Upper West or the Lower West. Everyone's in the Midwest. What's with that? What is with that? Is that that's like a Jerry Seinfeld kind of humor? What is it with the Midwest? I mean, we don't have anyone from the Upper West. We don't have anyone from the Lower West. Everyone's from the Midwest. What is it? Doesn't make any sense to me. Oh my goodness. I'm Jerry Seinfeld. Right? Is that Seinfeld level humor? Right? I love Portland and Seattle. Hugo in the Netherlands. Yonatan Mahari is in London. Good stuff, folks. Clove says it's beautiful. It is beautiful. But it's shit-lib territory. That's what he's complaining about. So there you go. We got Wellington in New Zealand. Wellington. Jamie says she's originally from Anchorage. Spent a lot of time in Portland and Seattle. There you go. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Josh Knorr is in St. Louis. Marcos Valencia is in Venezuela. What's the deal with the main trend in the world today? I don't get it. Why is everyone all into revolution? It doesn't make any sense. Oh my God. Anyway, yeah. Seinfeld. I mean, I was too young for that. It was not appropriate. My parents wouldn't let me watch it on TV. I was a kid, and then I started watching like reruns of it, and I'm just like, I don't get this. I don't get it. He's doing his stand-up comedy, and then it turns into a sitcom, and he's fighting with. He's like a wealthy yuppie in Manhattan, and George Costanza is always wanting to get a girlfriend, and yeah, there you go. I'm a hillbilly from Southern Oregon, so there we go. There we go. All right, folks. I'm going to start answering super chat questions. Who's with us? All right. So the first super chat that we received was the politics of Carlin. It's the politics of George Carlin. So George Carlin's this stand-up comedian. And one thing about George Carlin that I think many people are not aware of, he had a really long career. Early 60s, like late 50s, he was a famous comedian. He was on television. All through the 60s, all through the 70s, all through the 80s, all through the 90s, all until his death in like 2007, I think, 2008. He had a really long run as a comedian. He was famous for decade after decade after decade. And that he was from Harlem. He was from New York City, white Irish guy, grew up in a Catholic family, in New York City. And he was kind of a counterculture hippie comedian. That's how I would describe him. And there was always kind of an anti-establishment edge to his humor, but there was also kind of a resentment of any political correctness. There was also a kind of, there's a kind of a meanness in his humor, right? This kind of like, so people can hear, there's Trump, the anti-political correctness, the refusal to follow rules of respectability. That's Trumpian, right? That's conservative in a way. And some of the mean jokes that he makes, right? And he calls people weak and he calls for people to be tough. And, some of the humor he does, one could read conservatism into it, but there's still this anti-capitalist edge to a lot of it, an anti-establishment edge, an anti-rich edge, an anti-war edge to all of it. So it's a mishmash. I would argue that, when you think about politics in the United States, so you have leftists, right? You have communists, you have Marxists, right? You have rightists, conservatives, you have got the hard right, the John Birch Society, people like Alex Jones. But then you have a group of people, you have a group of boomers, and they're boomers, right? They're from the baby boomer generation, from the Vietnam generation, and they lean left, but they would probably agree with a lot of what Alex Jones said also. They're into conspiracy theories. They don't like the military-industrial complex, but they lean left. You think about Oliver Stone and his films about JFK and such. You think about Jesse Ventura. You think about Mike Gravel. Remember Mike Gravel? And they lean left. I mean, their understanding of things is mostly a left-wing kind of understanding, but it's not, it's not ideologically left-wing, and it's kind of an F the man. It's kind of a boomer anti-establishment view, right? That's what I get from George Carlin's humor, right? And the other thing is that, he's also saying things to be humorous, right? I mean, if you listen to a lot of his routines, he's not saying things he actually believes. He's saying things that are meant to be over the top and funny. And so, yeah, I mean, when I hear George Carlin, I hear boomer anti-establishment politics. That's what I hear more than anything. And I hear a kind of mockery of things that are deemed to be sacred. One thing boomers don't like, the boomer generation, they were all kids post-World War II, and they were always having to march in uniform and attend patriotic military ceremonies. They were always being told you can't say certain things. So the boomer generation, they have like a real dislike of formality. They have a real dislike of following rules. They don't like to follow rules. They don't like authority telling them what to do. They don't like formality. They don't like ritual. They don't like regimentation. They want to hang loose, kind of, right? And you see this with opposition to political correctness, but you also see this in, the anti-war stuff. And that's a big thing, right? That they were kids during like McCarthyism, post-World War II. Their parents had all fought in World War II and been through, the U.S. military in the World War II era was much more sophisticated in terms of, not only did you go into the military to learn to fight, but you also got like an ideological, they came out of World War II. A lot of Americans from the World War II generation came out of World War II ideologically loyal to America against communism and the American government. And, the military was, before that, the military had just been a fighting organization. But around the time of World War II, the military was much more of a politically, and it was much more political, and it was much more, people came out of the military with an ideological bone to pick, so it's a generation, the children of World War II veterans, who grew up in an atmosphere where a lot of patriotism and what they called Cold War conformity was being shoved down their throats, and they rebelled against it. And the new access to information, right? And that's what this whole book is about. If you read Brzezinski, the big Cold War strategist, this whole book that he wrote, which I quote a lot in this upcoming work that I continue working on, he basically argues the new left is not a threat to capitalism. It's just a reaction to the access to information. And that basically, rather than fighting the new left, the U.S. government should use it to bring down the Soviet Union. And that's what Brzezinski argues. And that the new left, in a lot of ways, was the boomer generation kind of pushing back against the Cold War conformity. And you see a lot of that. And I hear that in George Carlin, right? I hear a mockery of things that are considered sacred, a mockery of things that are considered off limits. And, what's his famous routine? George Carlin was famous for 7 dirty words. Remember that? And honestly, when I heard the 7 dirty words routine, I kind of thought it was a little gross. I thought it was a little immature. I like George Carlin's stuff. His stuff on war, his stuff mocking religion. A lot of it's really clever. But I listened to 7 dirty words, where he just goes over the list of words you can't say on the radio and makes, silly kind of immature jokes about all of them. I actually found that to be, of all of his stuff I've heard, that was like the least funny. It was the least funny. It wasn't that funny. I listened to 7 dirty words and I was just like, okay, this is just, it's like a child, like, I just said a bad word. He's got a whole thing about farting and, I was just listening to it and I'm just like, this is not the funniest stuff I've ever heard. But, at the time, that 7 dirty words routine that he did, that was really a big deal. It ended up like going to the Supreme Court or something. It was a really big deal that George Carlin did the 7 dirty words routine. It was a really, really big deal. But that was because people couldn't say these things, right? Yeah. 7 dirty words were cutting edge back in the day, youngster. I can tell. And I remember listening to it and thinking, this is just childishness. But at the time, it was definitely a big deal. So, I think George Carlin is a brilliant comedian, and his delivery is amazing. I will tell you that. And that's one thing. I could never be a comedian. I couldn't, right? I can give speeches, I can make a joke here or two, but I could never be a comedian because the amount of like perfect timing, the amount of planning out exactly what you're going to say. To be a good comedian is a lot of work, and it's funny because it's like, you wouldn't know that, right? You watch those shows. What's that show? The Mrs. Maisel, right? It's about this young woman, this woman who becomes a comedian. It was like one of those TV miniseries my wife had on the other day, or not the other day, but a couple years ago. And the way they portray it in there is the woman just gets up there and just talks about her life, and it's funny. And it's like, that's not how comedy works, right? Real serious comedians work really hard at doing what they do. They work very, very hard at doing what they do, and they spend years perfecting a routine, right? The first time they tell it, it might not be that funny, but they learn how they'll tell the same joke to audience after audience after audience. And by the time they finally get it to the point that you're seeing them on national TV, they have rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, and they've told it over and over and over again to many different audiences, and they've gotten it perfectly to how it can be funny, right? Being a comedian is not easy at all, right? Comedians, I take my hat off to them. They are very good orators. They are very, very good at interacting with audiences. They are very skilled, and I could never do it. I could never be a comedian. I'm just telling you that, right? I can give speeches and whatever. I could never do what comedians do. And if you want to see really good orators, listen to a comedian, because in order to do what a comedian does requires a high level of skill and sophistication. Being a comedian, I mean, it is not an easy thing to do. It is not an easy thing to do. Let me just put it that way. All right, next question. This is from Johnny Blaze. Shout out to you, Johnny Blaze, by the way. Johnny Blaze is awesome. I don't know if people have seen, but he confronted politicians, and he's done some great work. I mean, he's somebody who's out there with the People's Party and Nick Brana. He does great stuff. Shout out to you, Johnny Blaze, by the way. So glad you're here in the chat tonight. And you mentioned that on July 1st, 1971, Mao talked about a pandemic. Well, that's interesting. I don't know about that specifically, but I'm looking it up. Right? July 1st, 1971, Mao pandemic. I'm going to see what comes up, right? I'm going to see what comes up. I'm not seeing that everywhere. However, I will tell you that I do know, and this is, it's quoted in this book. Well, let me just pull it up, right? Because, see, 1971, that was at the height of the Cultural Revolution. That was after the fall of Lin Biao. It was after the fall of Lin Biao. And after the fall of Lin Biao, China's politics during the rise of the Gang of Four got pretty weird. Okay? I'm just going to be honest with you. That time, July of 1971, that's around the time, I'm posting in the link here. This is an interview that was in The Guardian. Well, this was in 1976. It was the year Mao died. But it's by William Hinton. And William Hinton is a very well-respected writer on, he wrote Fan Shin. He was living in China during the Cultural Revolution. He gave this interview. It's called China's Worldview. And it's nuts. I mean, and this was, the Gang of Four was saying nutty things during this time. It says, at this point, it says, we asked about war. Can a third world war be prevented? The thinking in China is that short of revolution in the U.S. and the USSR, a third world war is inevitable. The people of the world can take measures that they may delay the war, but as long as these two great powers, American and Russian, exist in their present form and contend for dominance, war is bound to come. Détente is an illusion, a smoke screen that covers up the underlying stark reality of an arms buildup leading up to war. How soon do they think the war will break out? The thinking in Beijing seems to be in 3 to 5 years. War is unlikely. In 10 years, it is a possibility. And in the terms of 30-year period, it is likely to be sooner rather than later. Another 30 years without world war is impossible. Does this mean nuclear war? Not necessarily. The feeling is that a major world war might be fought with conventional arms. Even a nuclear war will not destroy mankind. Mankind will destroy the bomb, and the bomb will not destroy mankind. At least half the human race will survive, and war will hasten revolution, and revolution will solve all the problems. I mean, this is the prevailing thinking among the Gang of Four during the last period of the Cultural Revolution, from the time of 1969 when Lin Biao disappeared up until the rise of Deng Xiaoping, when Jiang Qing and the people they call the Gang of Four, when they were running China, they had some nutty views. They were predicting the apocalypse. They were predicting nuclear war. It was pretty nuts. There's a reason that there was so much celebration when the Gang of Four were arrested. If the Soviet Union is the main danger, does that mean a stronger United States? They're talking about the Soviet Union being the main danger to the people of the world. I mean, it's, you read this interview from William Hinton in 1976 that basically is him laying out the Gang of Four view of the world. It is dark and apocalyptic and crazy. It's crazy. So the idea that Mao would say, oh, there's going to be a mass plague virus or something, that sounds like in line with what the Gang of Four were putting out. China was a deeply poor country. And thank you, Brian. Thank you for the super chat. China was a deeply poor country at the time. The Soviet Union had cut off China. China was isolated. And China was kind of drifting into the U.S. camp. And they were still deeply poor. And the Gang of Four, they stayed in power by punishing people and wrecking people. And the way that they justified what they did and China remaining in poverty was they said, oh, we're going to have a nuclear war. After the nuclear war, China will take over or something like that. And it was pretty nuts. And you read this interview with William Hinton from 1976. It's insane. I mean, it's utterly insane. And the Gang of Four period in China is remembered as a very, very dark period. It was not a good period in the history of the country. The Gang of Four was not a good time. Deng's reforms were necessary because the Gang of Four had kept the country in a state of chronic poverty and caused a lot of problems. And that's important. So whether Mao specifically predicted COVID, I don't know. But the fact that in the 70s, China was predicting some kind of apocalyptic event, that would kill off 2/3 of the human race or something, that sounds about right. So that fits with what China was putting out during those years. So there you go. There you go. All right. All right. Next question. Michael Parenti discussed anything but class leftism. ABC, anything but class. Yes. And even when they talk about class, the point I was making was that even when they talk about class, the way they talk about it is they talk about it as if it's just another form of privilege, right? And they're not talking about the capitalist class versus the working class. They're talking about, class privilege, income privilege, like people with 10% more than somebody else, people with 15% more than somebody else have more privilege. The way that the intersectional narrative always works is it's never about the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. It's always inciting proletarians against each other and a fight over who has it worse. It's always the way they do it. My thoughts on Mike Tyson's Mao tattoo. Okay. You can talk about that. All right. Very good. That's always the way they talk about it. And yeah, I've read that in The Culture Struggle by Michael Parenti. He talks about that. Thoughts on libertarianism? Well, look, there was a time in my life where I was really fired up about libertarianism, and it really drove me up the wall. And on some level, it still does, because when it comes to economics, libertarianism is completely nuts and lost. The idea that the USA just isn't capitalist enough, that capitalism is utopia, and that, that we just deregulate everything. The Ayn Rand stuff is so wrong and so evil, in terms of economics. But one thing that I've learned over the years is, first of all, a lot of libertarians don't care about economics. Did you know that? A lot of libertarians are not concerned about economics. A lot of libertarians, they just don't want the government to lock people in jail. They just view the U.S. government as very corrupt, and they don't think about economics, right? So that's the first thing to remember. I am someone who thinks about economics constantly. I'm constantly thinking about economics and data and statistics, and it's infuriating to me, this notion that the free market is the answer to everything, because clearly the free market is not the answer to everything. And the free market policies, libertarian economic policies from the Chicago School of Economics, have been a disaster, right? Okay. I hear you. That's one of the things that we have to avoid discussing on this stream, Brandong. That's just one of the things we have to avoid. I think you know why. The censors don't like it when we get into detail about certain things. And I can't go into huge detail about that, but I do appreciate, your comment there. But when it comes to libertarianism, you know, I mean, it's just one of those things that you can't, you know, it frustrated me. The reason that I got so frustrated with libertarianism was because I was surrounded by Republicans. And for the longest time, these Republicans, they supported Bush, they supported the wars, they supported torture. And then out of nowhere, they all became libertarians and they realized the wars were wrong and they realized the government was lying and it was torturing people. And it was just because we don't have real capitalism. And it's because, you know, our government is communist and Bush is a neocon and neoconservatives are Trotskyites. So the neoconservatives are all communists and we need the free market back. And the free market just magically always works, you know, and they say crazy things. There'd be no monopolies if it weren't for the government. No, the free market naturally creates monopolies. The government forcibly breaks up monopolies constantly. You know, they say crazy things. They don't understand. They have this fiction in their head that the free market just magically creates optimal answers, and it just does not. And it's infuriating to me. And everywhere Austrian school or Chicago school economics has been implemented, it's been a disaster. Ooh, you're going to get me fired up there. Everywhere it's been implemented. And on top of that, you know, I mean, the libertarians have been running the United States. Alan Greenspan, a protege of Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand's personal friend, you know, he was running the Federal Reserve. He had the most important post in the U.S. economy for decades, from like the 1980s up until 2008. Alan Greenspan was running the Federal Reserve. I mean, you know, and the USA is the most free market country of any Western capitalist country. We don't have national health care. We don't have guaranteed college. We have very little government over. I mean, yeah, we do have somewhat of a welfare state over here, but compared to every other Western capitalist country, we have a very minimal one. But these libertarians, they look at it and they just like, well, we need to get rid of food stamps. We need to get rid of everything. And I mean, if you look at Ron Paul's platform, get rid of every social program. If you had done that, there would have been riots in the streets, right? You cut off everyone's food stamps. You cut off everyone's government assistance. I mean, there would be riots in the streets. The ultimate conclusion of Ron Paul's platform would have been a crisis that would have, you know, resulted in some kind of authoritarian regime being installed. If you were to implement the policies that Ron Paul advocated, you just immediately got rid of the state. It would be a disaster. And, you know, look, I know a lot of libertarians believe in growth. And that's why they're libertarians. They want to start their own business. And they feel like it's rigged for the ultra rich. And that, you know, that book I promote a lot, The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. Carl Oglesby was a leftist. He was a socialist, but it's endorsed on the back by Murray Rothbard. It's endorsed by Murray Rothbard. You know, and when I talk about the divisions in the ruling class and the Eastern establishment, libertarians agree with me. In fact, they know better than leftists do. Leftists often do this abstain thing. Oh, all the capitalists are bad and all that. But libertarians are much more tuned into the divisions in the ruling class. They know about the fights behind the scenes and where the power lies, etc. So, you know, there are some things I can respect libertarians for. You know, crypto. I think crypto is great. You know, cryptocurrency, it's great. I mean, it's not creating value, right? It's fictitious capital, but the idea that there's this other means of trade beyond the dollar, beyond the regular currencies. I think crypto is good largely. It enables, you know, economic access to different countries and stuff. Crypto is a good thing existing. It is speculation, it is fake money, etc. But so what? I mean, it enables people to engage in trade. And there's a reason that all these crypto people are fleeing to Russia and fleeing, you know, the US government is going after all these crypto people. There's a reason for that, because crypto is a threat to the global financial system and they want to control crypto. They very much want to control crypto. And there's a reason that so many crypto people have had to flee to Russia. And there's a reason that Russia, an anti-imperialist country, has taken in crypto people who flee. I mean, you know, so it's complicated. These things are complicated. The ideology that libertarians espouse, I vehemently disagree with it. They do not understand economics. They don't understand socialism. They think socialism is just when the government does stuff and government is always bad and they want to have freedom and they can make a lot of money. The Ayn Rand stuff, which is not all libertarians, but the Ayn Rand stuff is particularly evil and satanic. But that said, you know, I am trying my hardest to understand that things are complicated. There's a reason that the U.S. government, for example, recently said that libertarians were a group that's being monitored by the FBI. Well, there's a reason for that, right? And as I mentioned before, all the scary libertarians, the like fascist libertarians, are all in the Trump camp now. All the like white supremacist libertarians are no longer libertarians. All the John Birch Society crowds. Libertarianism is not what it once was. Look, I understand there's a big libertarian socialist caucus in the Libertarian Party. At their conventions, there's the libertarian socialists. Now, those are people that probably wouldn't like me and probably see me as like the worst thing ever. But at the same time, they are open to socialism to some degree or other. A bit harsh on the Frankfurt School. No, I wasn't. Dorno and are brilliant. Marcuse less so. All right, we'll talk about that. And Marcuse. All right. That's a good question. I appreciate that. I'll have a lot to say about that. Anyway, there we go about libertarianism. Do you know about Operation Storm 333? I don't know about it. So let's Google it. Let's see what comes up. Operation Storm 333. What is it? Also known as the Taj Palace Assault, something that happened in Afghanistan. Okay. Soviet-Afghan War. Didn't know about it. No, I'll have to read up on it. I was not aware of this episode. I haven't studied the Soviet-Afghan War in great depth. So there you go. All righty. Next question. What is intersectionality? Well, intersectionality, my understanding of it is this, right? It is the study of oppression. When they talk about feminism, they talk about first wave feminism, the struggle of women for the right to vote, the struggle of women for basic rights. When they talk about second wave feminism, that's in the 1970s. That's, consciousness raising, women's empowerment, the right to abortion, the right to get divorced, women building domestic violence shelters. And then what they now call third wave feminism is intersectional, meaning that it talks about how women are oppressed, but how this lines up with the oppression of people of color, how this lines up with the oppression of LGBT people, how this lines up with oppression based on income level. That intersectionality is this study of oppression. It is an academic study of oppression. That is what intersectionality is. It is an academic study that talks about racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia. It is a field that studies how different forms of oppression lead to people being marginalized. It emphasizes the need to highlight the narratives of oppressed people. Intersectionality is talking about different oppressed groups and how their oppression is linked to the oppression of other groups and highlighting the voices and the narratives of oppressed communities. And it fits in with postmodernism. And postmodernism is the belief in deconstruction. Postmodernism says there is no ideology, there is no grand narrative of history, of humanity, there is no ideology, and that the only good comes from taking apart grand narratives. And the more you can deconstruct and take apart grand narratives, the more we're moving toward freedom. And that the basis of all oppression is grand narratives and ideology. And if we can take those things apart, we're moving toward freedom. We're freeing the mind, right? We're moving toward more freedom. So the philosophical wing of it is postmodernism. Intersectionality is the more sociology, anthropology wing of it. But it's about studying how people face marginalization, how people are oppressed, and how it manifests itself. I've seen all of this. They study advertisements, right? And they compare the way women are portrayed in advertisements, and they compare, they do all kinds of, they go into great depth showing various ways that problematic narratives about marginalized groups, or how groups are misrepresented, or how stereotypes are promoted, or it's a whole field. And if you talk about this stuff, there's a lot of grant money you can get. The Ford Foundation would love to pay you as an academic to go into great detail talking about how spending years studying billboards in Manhattan to determine how the billboards in Manhattan promote discriminatory narratives about transgender Puerto Ricans. And it is the well-funded, well-paid-for wing of academic leftism. That's what it is. They call it intersectionality, and it focuses on privilege and marginalization, and it rejects Marxism as quote unquote class reductionist. It hates populism, and it is largely focused on the postmodern philosophy, the belief in deconstruction, that any grand narrative is oppressive. And if we take apart people's beliefs, if we highlight the narratives of marginal groups and we take apart ideology, we're somehow advancing. That's kind of the idea. The populist candidate generally wins the Iowa caucuses. So now the DNC has decided to change the schedule. I did see that. Yeah. And yeah, historically, populist candidates have done really, really well. That was a little interesting what was done at the Iowa caucuses last time. Remember that? Now Bernie Sanders, and that was interesting. The way the Iowa caucuses like broke. Do you remember that? Now that's one of those things. We're not questioning elections here. We're not questioning elections here. We are not questioning elections here. But there you go. We are not questioning elections here. All right. Anyway. But yes, I agree with you, John McCarthy. I agree with you that Iowa. A couple things about Iowa. Little known fact: Xi Jinping, the president of China, lived in Iowa. Did you know that? When he was just a young man in his 20s. He was the representative of a small district. He was like a mayor in an agricultural district in China. So they sent Xi Jinping to Iowa, to a town called Muscatine, Iowa. And he slept in a farmhouse in Muscatine, Iowa, in a teenage boy's bedroom where they had Star Trek wallpaper. And Xi Jinping slept in this small town, and he studied the agricultural techniques of farmers in Iowa. And that trip, the fact that Xi Jinping went to Iowa and studied American agricultural techniques, that is a big part of Xi Jinping's life story. That was a pivotal trip in his life when he, as just this low-level Chinese government official in the late 70s, early 80s, they said, Xi, we need you to go to Iowa. And so the Chinese Communist Party sent Xi Jinping to Iowa, and he stayed with this farming family in Muscatine, Iowa, and he slept in the bedroom. And this is such an important part of President Xi Jinping's story, that the farmhouse that he slept in, they have rebuilt it in China. And Chinese people pay money as tourists to go into this, to a model, like a remodel, a remake of the house that Xi Jinping slept in Muscatine, Iowa. Did you know this? This is a really big part of Xi Jinping's identity, is that he lived in Iowa for a brief period, for like a couple weeks. He lived in Iowa. And that is a really big part of Xi Jinping's narrative. And the idea is that, Xi Jinping, he is very much somebody who he wants what's best for China. And he was in a farming district, and he knew that America had great agricultural prowess. American agribusiness is huge, and we have some of the biggest crop outputs in the world. So Xi Jinping got on a plane. Young Xi Jinping slept in a farmhouse. And that's a big part of Xi Jinping's identity. Little known fact. Another little known fact: Iowa was a stronghold of abolitionists. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Republican Party was founded in Iowa. Let me look that up. I'm not sure of that one. I believe it was founded in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Yeah, I think it was founded in Iowa. Republican Party founding. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was founded in Iowa. No, it was founded in Wisconsin. I'm sorry. I was wrong. But it was a stronghold of pro-Lincoln sentiment. It was certainly a stronghold of pro-Lincoln sentiment. It was a stronghold of abolitionism and anti-slavery. They called them the Free Soilers. So there we go. Did you consider Star Trek the highest form of communism? All right. All righty. So there we go. But yeah, Iowa has a revolutionary history as a state. I mean, it was a stronghold of anti-slavery sentiment, of abolitionism, and Xi Jinping lived there for a little bit. And the fact that he lived there is a really big part of Xi Jinping's life story and narrative. So someone said they heard Bernie Sanders was blackmailed. I don't think that's true. I do think that going up against the Bill Clinton machine, against the Hillary Clinton machine, puts you in a lot of danger. I agree with that. But from what I understand, Bernie Sanders told a lot of people in 2016, I know that I will not be president. He went into his 2016 campaign with the understanding that he was not going to be president, that it wasn't, that he was blackmailed, and that, Bernie Sanders, his base, the people who supported him, were more radical than he was. In a lot of ways, right? He tried to get them to calm down. I was at the 2016 convention reporting on it, and the crowds that were booing him, it was his own supporters were booing him when he endorsed Hillary Clinton, and that he was trying to calm down his supporters, and that, yes, he wanted to get his kind of populist class struggle message out to American workers. But, he knew he wasn't going to be president, and he was ready to throw in the towel and endorse Hillary Clinton. I will say that Hillary Clinton's endorsement of Bernie Sanders was stupid. She's standing there in front of all of the supporters, and not Hillary Clinton's endorsement, but Bernie, the like photo op they did with the big crowd when Bernie endorses Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's like, wow, I just spent the day meeting with Bernie Sanders. And the crowd goes, yay! She's like, and I met his wife, Jane Sanders. And the crowd goes, yay! And she's like, and I met his son, Levi Sanders. Yay! I was like, and next she's going to say, and I met his dog, Scruffy Sanders. Yay! And I met his cousin, Elijah Sanders. Yay! And I met his neighbor's cousin's ex-wife, but her last name is not Sanders. Boo. Oh, sorry. I mean, it was a little bit dumb. It was a little bit dumb. I will say it was a bit of a dumb moment, but that was a wild campaign, 2016. I was reporting on that campaign. I was going to rallies around the country. I went to both conventions, and that was a wild campaign. I'll tell you that much. And what happened at the 2016 Democratic Convention, that was historically unprecedented. Every Democratic primary, there's always a left-wing Democrat like Bernie Sanders, or like not just like Bernie Sanders, but Dennis Kucinich or Al Sharpton, or Jesse Jackson, who is the left-wing candidate. And then they get in there and they lose, and then they tell everyone to go vote for the Democrats. And that is not what happened in 2016. Bernie did that. It was supposed to work that way, but the base was so fired up. I mean, they were chanting, what is it? We won't vote for Hillary. And it was pretty wild. And those protests outside the Democrat convention in 2016 were pretty wild as well. So there you go. But I don't think he was blackmailed. I think he was willing to drop out. But there you go. Mike Tyson's Mao tattoo. Right. So Mike Tyson went to prison, I believe, right, for rape. And he felt victimized by going to prison. And so in prison, he became obsessed with anti-American leaders. He got really interested in Saddam Hussein. He got really interested in Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And he got really interested in Mao. And he read, because Mao's writings are more accessible than like Saddam Hussein's writings and such. He got his hands on like the Little Red Book and stuff when he was in prison. That Mike Tyson, the boxer, got really into Mao when he was in prison because, that stuff is easier to read. And, that stuff gets passed around. Mao's writings get passed around by black prisoners. That happens. Still to this day. I mean, I worked with prisoners in Ohio, and they do pass around Mao's writings. So after he went to prison, I know like Mike Tyson went to China. He did like a photo op at the tomb of Mao in Beijing. I mean, that's Mike Tyson. I will say there's a documentary about the life of Mike Tyson, and a friend of mine years ago told me to go watch it. And I was just like, okay. And it was actually very well made. And Mike Tyson's not a good, I'm not going to say he's a good dude. I mean, he's a convicted rapist. He's, obviously, he bit off somebody's ear. The guy's got a temper like you wouldn't believe, right? What's the quote that he shouted at somebody? I'm not even going to repeat it. He shouted at this reporter, like, I'm going to F you until you effing love me, mother effer, or something like that. The guy's got a temper. The guy's not the sharpest tool in the shed. I guess he's a good boxer, but he's, a misogynist to some degree or other, convicted rapist. But the documentary, what I thought, I didn't know about his life story. And the documentary was very compelling because you can kind of see where he came from. That's what I thought was amusing about the documentary. All right, come on. Go and watch the stream where I went off on them both, man. Come on. No, I'll answer that, but thoughts on Norton and Haiphong. You guys, you always love that, don't you? You always love internet drama with me talking about somebody. You always love it when people talk smack, and you're going to go jump on Ben's stream or Danny's stream and say, what do you think about what Caleb said about you? But I'll answer it. I'll give a short answer. You're not going to get a repeat of what I did in that previous stream where I started screaming and yelling about Danny. I'm not going to do that again, but I'll give you a much more calm and diplomatic answer to that question. But anyway, yeah, I actually enjoyed the documentary about Mike Tyson's life. It was like his background, how he became a boxer. I thought it was actually kind of interesting. So there you go. What do you think of Extinction Rebellion? Malthusians. They're degrowthers. They think human beings are the problem. They are whipping up climate hysteria. They want to reduce the population. Their symbol is that hourglass, like we've only got time, like predicting the apocalypse. It's not good. The first suspicion I had of the climate change movement was actually told to me by a veteran activist. An older communist told me he didn't like the climate change stuff. And I asked him why. And he said, Caleb, because I remember the 80s. In the 80s, you had to vote for the Democrats or else the world was going to burst into flames. If Ronald Reagan got reelected, there was going to be nuclear war. So we all had to put our criticism of the Democrats aside. We had to vote for Walter Mondale. We had to vote for Jimmy Carter. We had to vote for Mike Dukakis, because if not, there was going to be nuclear war, right? There was going to be nuclear war. And that this is a thing that the Democrats do, right, is they whip up this hysteria. If you don't vote for them, you're going to die. We're all going to die. Don't think, just panic, just vote for the Democrats. And you know what? Ronald Reagan got reelected, and George Bush got elected, and Jimmy Carter got defeated by Reagan, and the world didn't burst into flames. And the Democrats were very good at whipping up this hysteria of getting the left in line by saying Ronald Reagan, if he gets reelected, that was their line. There will be nuclear war and everyone will die. And it's really disingenuous, but it's a way of creating a panic, right? You scare people, right? Just like the neocons did with, terrorism, right? With terrorism, right? Oh, you're all going to die from Al-Qaeda. If you don't, support the Patriot Act, if you don't support invading Iraq, you're going to die at the hands of terrorists. It's a similar kind of thing, right? I don't like that. When people are trying to make you panic, when people are trying to make you afraid, that's a way to manipulate you, right? And when people say, oh, you got to decide now, Oh, you got to make your decision fast. Oh, you got to, that's a way to manipulate somebody. That's a sales technique, right? If you're looking for an apartment, I just moved, so I dealt with some of this, right? You're looking for an apartment, right? If some slimy salesman is trying to get you to apply for this apartment, you're not sure you want it, you're going to look around. He's going to say, well, I got this wealthy family that's coming by later today, and if you don't apply right now, I can't guarantee it's going to be there. You got to decide now. You got to apply. It's manipulative, right? And so on the surface of it, my friend pointed out to me that when he heard, all the climate hysteria, the planet's going to burst into flames, we're all going to die, he said, I smell a flim-flam. I smell a grift. I smell something that ain't right. He was right. That was a good instinct, right? Now, obviously, it looks to me like climate change to some degree or other is a reality. I am open at this point. I'm more open than I have ever been to what they call climate denial because I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of the wokeism. I'm so sick of the Malthusianism and the degrowth. But there are irregular weather patterns going on. I'm open to criticism. I'm not ready to say that I know better than the majority of the scientific community. I'm not ready to say the scientific community is involved in a full-on fraud, okay? If the scientific consensus at this point says man-made climate change is a reality, I'm willing to accept that. But I'm more open than ever to hearing criticism of it because I'm so tired of how climate change is being used. Why aren't these people promoting nuclear energy? Why aren't they promoting fusion energy? Why is the only solution they can come up with degrowth and make everyone poorer? Drive down living standards, reduce consumption, reduce energy consumption. Why is that their only answer? And why is the target always average Americans? And why is the target always plastic straws? You know, I mean, if there's some emergency and if we don't change the way we use our resources now, why are they not calling for public ownership of the means of production? Right? Why is it always average people living too comfortable of a lifestyle that are the problem? Something's off. Something's off, okay? And, you know, the great documentary that Peter Coffin just gave about the dangers of Malthusianism and degrowth, and, you know, it's important. So I'm not a fan of Extinction Rebellion. Not ready to deny climate change, but I don't buy the hysteria around it, number one. Number two, the answer is obviously we got to get beyond fossil fuels to fusion energy, to nuclear energy, to a higher form of energy. We don't have to get to worse. So something's off, right? And I don't like the atmosphere, the way they put things. I don't like their anti-human message. Something's off about Extinction Rebellion. Not a big fan. Not a big fan. Weren't you a bit harsh on the Frankfurt School? No, I don't. My friend, this is called The Authoritarian Personality by Theodor Adorno. This is one of the main books of the Frankfurt School. The Authoritarian Personality. And Theodor Adorno is not the only person to have written it. Google those other names who wrote it with him, and you'll find that they worked with something called the Tavistock Institute, which was an institution set up during the Second World War to study the kind of things that later became the subject of MK Ultra, right? People tied in with the Tavistock Institute, which was a British intelligence, marketing, influencing, you know, do we say brainwashing? Do we say mind control? Do we say, you know, it was an institute set up by the British government to engage in psychological operations during World War II that after the Second World War became used by private companies and subsidized by the Rockefellers to do marketing research and other things. And on top of that, I love this. All right, so it's called The Authoritarian Personality. It's a well-funded study that they did about, you know, people, what kind of person was a fascist in Europe? How did people become fascists? What made people fascists? And you just got to love this. This is just classic, right? And I will show you the page. I will pull it up because it's just, you can't make this up, right? This alone is like, should set off alarm bells. All right. It's in the footnotes. It is in the footnotes. I will find the page it's on because people tried to deny this. People got very fired up when I first pointed this out because people don't want this to be true. But it might take me a minute to find it here, but it's really important. And this in and of itself should discredit the book immediately. So, all right, we have to look up in the index because I don't want to get this wrong. Yeah. Okay. 231. All right. This is a footnote on page 231 of The Authoritarian Personality. On page 231, the footnote lists a number of names, and it lists all these different names. These are among the writers whose thinking about authoritarianism influenced our own. And what is one of these names? Wilhelm Reich. It's right there in the footnotes. Their thinking about fascism was influenced by Wilhelm Reich. Look up Wilhelm Reich. That's the Orgone machine man. That's the guy who believed space aliens and UFOs were following us. That's the guy who invented a magical machine for people to masturbate inside of, to capture the magical energy from their masturbation. Yeah. Look up Wilhelm Reich, the psychoanalyst crackpot of Germany who fled to the United States and was living in New York City after World War II. He wrote The Mass Psychology of Fascism. And he argued in that book that the swastika looks like two human bodies having sex, that all of Nazism was rooted in sexual repression, that the cause of Hitler coming to power was that German parents weren't letting their kids masturbate enough. That is an influence on this book. The fact that they list Wilhelm Reich, one of the most delusional crackpots ever, as an influence on their analysis of fascism, that should be like, ding, 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 something's wrong here. Something's wrong here. Space aliens, magical orgasm machine man, Hitler was titillating everybody. The swastika looks like two human bodies having sex, man. That's an influence on their philosophy. And it's right here in the footnotes. They list Wilhelm Reich. You can read it. W. Reich. So that alone should be a discrediting thing in this book. But if you read this book, The Authoritarian Personality, it's this long study that was commissioned after the Second World War by all kinds of foundations and think tanks associated with American intelligence. And it figures out that there's this why did Hitler come to power? Why did Hitler come to power? I mean, it wasn't that like capitalism was in decay and there was an economic crisis and overproduction. And no, can't be that, right? They don't talk about Arpalm Dutt and, the capitalist crisis and Bonapartism. None of that. No. Why did fascism come to power? Well, there's these groups of people out there who want to fight for causes, and they want to believe in something, and they advocate truth, and they give their life to causes, and they believe the right and wrong exists, and they join organizations, and they bond with other people, and they uphold moral codes, and that is dangerous. There can't be any belief in truth. There can't be any belief in right and wrong. There's these dangerous people that have this mental illness called the authoritarian personality, where they actually want to fight for something and believe in something. And that's what we got to get rid of. We need everyone to be in a weird state of mind where everything's a lie, man. There is no truth. This ain't Marxism, my friend. This is not Marxism. This is really dangerous, sick postmodernism. But basically, there's this group of people who might be communists, might be fascists, might be Christians, might be Muslims, might be Buddhists, but they believe in stuff. They have ideology. They devote their lives to causes. They join organizations. They got to be gotten rid of because they're a threat to the great individuals, the great smart ones, and they want to team people up and mobilize people to fight for causes. You got to get rid of them. It's liberalism expressed, right? You read Adorno, it calls itself Marxism. It is not Marxism. It is anti-populism. That's what it is. It's anti-populism. Anti-populism is what I would call it. And it's dangerous. Herbert Marcuse, right? One-dimensional man. The intellectuals will make the revolution, not the working class. Right? The revolution is about opposition to alienation and mass marketing, not, the workers having their wages go down, the crisis of overproduction. No. It's about, the intellectual, standing up. Wrote it down. Good question. About the intellectuals standing up and questioning the status quo. It's an anti-populist text, right? And one-dimensional man. And Herbert Marcuse, he was an American intelligence operative. He worked for the U.S. Office of War Information, and then he moved to Germany and worked for the Frankfurt School. He was a U.S. disinformation intelligence officer. And all of this stuff was funded by the CIA through Der Monat magazine and the Congress for Cultural Freedom. All this stuff was paid for by American intelligence. The CIA was funding all the Frankfurt School stuff. And when you go to college, that's the Marxism they teach you. They don't teach you about overproduction. They don't teach you about the built-in problems of capitalism, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. They don't teach you about exploitation, and they don't teach you any of that. They teach you about alienation and mass group conformity and the dangers of the authoritarian personality. And Hitler came to power because German parents wouldn't let their kids masturbate, and it's nuts. So there you go. No, I'm not too harsh on them, right? And the fact that I'm sorry. I have spent my life studying Marxism. I am with the global communist movement. And there's this whole entity they call the New Left that doesn't believe what I believe. I'll tell you that much. I'm the Marxism of Gus Hall. I'm the Marxism of William Z. Foster. I'm the Marxism of Paul Robeson and Harry Haywood. I'm the Marxism of Claudia Jones. I'm the Marxism of Eugene Debs and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. That's my Marxism. And I want nothing to do with this, I don't know what you want to call it, critical theory or whatever. Right? I'm not here talking about how intellectuals are alienated and persecuted by the inferior rabble. I'm here talking about how capitalism, a system where production is organized for profit, is grinding the world into poverty, and that we need to abolish the anarchy of production and have the banks, factories, and industries and the centers of economic power organized to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few. And with socialism, we can raise millions of people out of poverty, and we can create a world with so much abundance that that the need for a state and all social hierarchies can fade away. We can reach that ultimate goal of communism. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in Marxist economics. I'm interested in overcoming the chaos of the market. I'm interested in creating a society where jobs, healthcare, and education are available to all, and living standards are rising as we work together to build a society in the interests of all without profits in command. And that is not what the Frankfurt School is about. They are about something else. They're about critiquing art and movies or whatever. So there you go. Would you consider Star Trek the highest form of communism? Well, many people have pointed out that in the Star Trek TV series, they don't have money. And it's supposed to be some kind of society. They have these things called replicators that just can make whatever food they want. And it's like, they have a society where there's a level of voluntarism. They're on the ship. They're not getting paid to get on the ship and travel. It's just kind of voluntary, and that there are communistic themes in Star Trek. Now, my understanding of the narrative of the series, I'm like embarrassed that I know this, but that's okay, is that, the original Star Trek with Captain Kirk, and then the next Star Trek with Captain Picard, and then Star Trek Voyager and Deep Space Nine, that the original, like the backstory for all of it, is that a nuclear war destroyed most of humanity. World War III broke out between the Soviet Union and the United States. And then after World War III, there was very few human beings left. But the human beings who were left merged into one and combined the best elements of both systems. Right? They combined the Soviet system with the American system. And then the Vulcans, or what is it? The Vulcans or I forget. The Vulcans or I don't even remember. Whatever Spock is, they came down and they gave them warp speed or, warp speed technology. And that's how the human beings got into the outer space galactic federation or whatever, right? Is that after the nuclear war, destroyed most of the human race, the Vulcans, it's Vulcans. It's the Romulans are the other ones, right? And it's the Vulcans, they combined. And so it's not exactly Marxism. There was a hoax email going around for a while claiming that the UFO communist group, what are they called? The Trotskyite group that believed in UFOs, claiming that Gene Roddenberry had been associated with them. That's fake news, not true. Gene Roddenberry was not a Marxist. Before he wrote Star Trek, he wrote Dragnet, the police show. There is that communist group that has a similar weird narrative that like nuclear war will break out and lay the basis for communism. The Posadists, right? And so people have pointed out that there's like the Posadist narrative, right? That nuclear war would lay the basis for the aliens coming down and bringing us new technology, that UFOs are proof that socialism exists on other planets, stuff like that. That was the Posadist. Was it in Argentina? There was this Trotskyite in Argentina who'd been arrested and tortured, and he had kind of a psychotic break. And he came out of prison with all these theories about UFOs and stuff. And he was like the UFO Trotskyists. And they never had very many people in America, right? But in Latin America, it's a big current. Like Posadism is a big wing of Trotskyism in Latin America. And they're the UFO people. And people pointed out that the Star Trek backstory and the Posadist narrative kind of overlap, but they're not connected to each other. So there you go. But yeah, my understanding is the basis of the Star Trek series, there's something about the Cold War leading to nuclear war, and that in Star Trek they don't have money, something like that. But whatever. There we go. Next question. Thoughts on Ben Norton and Danny Haiphong? I mean, I'll just say in much calmer terms, and I don't know, folks. See, I look at that stream that I did the other night where I had my angry meltdown at Danny Haiphong, and I look at that stream and I'm just like, everyone loved it. And it's like, okay, so do I do that more? Do I pound the table more and scream and yell more? I mean, is that what you all want to see? Maybe it is, but is that really good for me? I mean, shouldn't I hold myself to higher standards? People love it when I use cuss words and I scream and yell, but at the same time, is that really the best representation, right? I'm criticizing these people for their representation of Marxism. Shouldn't I do a better job representing it myself? Shouldn't I be more professional? I was criticizing Danny Haiphong and Luna Soy and others for how they represent Marxism. Shouldn't I also hold myself to higher standards? I've looked at that stream and I've self-criticized and thought, is this the best way I could have done this? I got a little fired up, but then people really liked it. I noticed that stream has a lot more views. People love that when I get fired up. People love it. Right? It's entertainment, right? That's why people watch Alex Jones scream and yell. That's why, I mean, they could listen to anybody ramble on, but I screamed and yelled and waved my arms and people like it. So I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what the best way to do is, right? I'm questioning a lot of different things right now. We're having a big CPI event, March 25th. We still haven't even figured out where because there's different ideas in the works and different concepts of the event we still had to work out. And, but, I mean, I look at that stream and it's like, okay, I got all fired up. I used a lot of 4-letter words and told you what I think of them. Well, I will say it here in a much shorter and less passionate mode. I'll just put it in a little bit of a calmer way and say, I think that Danny Haiphong and Ben Norton, both of them, former Greek Prime Minister Alex Spiros is now the wealthiest politician alive. Your thoughts? Basically my feeling about Danny Haiphong and Ben Norton is that they, I guess my feelings are twofold. First of all, my major political difference with them is that they attach anti-imperialism to wokeness. Ben Norton is woke. And he is committed to this belief that liberal activists in the United States who are working with the Democrats to drive out the Trumpers, that they are who anti-imperialists should pander to. They are who anti-imperialists should embed themselves with. That is what he believes. And he's getting orientation from Brian Becker and the PSL about doing that. And the problem with that is that he must have his head very far up his ass because those people hate communism. Those people, one of their main arguments against Trump is that he supposedly was friends with Putin and that he's a dictator like Kim Jong-un and that he was too anti-war and that he, oh my God, met with Kim Jong-un and wanted peace with North Korea. And those folks, the left, are more pro-war than Republicans are at this point. On top of that, those folks hate the working class and average Americans, and they oppose any form of populism. And Ben Norton and Danny Haiphong both work very, very, very hard to try and keep Marxists and leftists and socialists to embed themselves with the movement, with liberal activists. And that is wrong. And Ben Norton, at some points, he gets ridiculous with it. For example, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruling of Roe versus Wade was overturned, we were having our retreat, and I'm actually going to post it. I think it's one of my better talks. I gave a talk at our retreat. Roe v. Wade was overturned while our the Lynn Valley Training School of the Center for Political Innovation was happening. And so because of that, I had to address it. And I urged the people at the retreat, even though I personally am pro-choice, even though the majority are pro-choice in our organization, I said, don't go and protest this and don't feed into the culture war divide. And that's what I said. What did Ben Norton and Danny Haiphong say about it? They said, oh my God, Republicans are theocrat fascists and we got to drive out Trump. And oh my God, they repeated, they sounded like Rachel Maddow. And they repeated the hysteria around Roe versus Wade being overturned. And with Ben Norton, it was particularly hypocritical because of the fact that Ben Norton lives in Nicaragua. And he does a lot of good reporting about how Nicaragua is a prosperous socialist society. But Nicaragua, in addition to being a prosperous socialist country, also has some of the strictest anti-abortion laws in the world. So if everyone who opposes abortion is a theocrat fascist, why is Ben Norton living in a theocrat fascist country? Proof that culture wars is not what it's about is all around Ben Norton. The Sandinistas built up a populist movement of working class people, and that movement is anti-choice. It is. And the Sandinistas are socialists. And the broad masses of people in Nicaragua, especially indigenous people who've had the white people try to exterminate them, are anti-abortion. And so for Ben Norton to be tweeting out that anyone who opposes abortion is a theocrat fascist, first of all, he's calling Muslims, all Muslims in America are theocrat fascists then. Most of the priests and nuns who march against the death penalty, they're theocrat fascists. The Nation of Islam, most hardcore black nationalists then would be theocrat fascists. I mean, it's an ignorant position to take, but it's the woke position to take. And meanwhile, I'm the one who said that we should be willing to work with people that are anti-choice or against gay marriage, even though we disagree with them. He took the opposite position. He took the position, oh no, we have to join with Vosh, we have to join with the DNC and cancel anyone who's against abortion. And it's complete hypocrisy because he's living in a country that is proof that that's not what socialists do. And it drives me up the wall. I have been trying so hard to build a socialist movement that could actually reach the broad masses of people. And I've been studying people like the Sandinistas and people like, the Chinese Communist Party and trying to build an actual socialist movement that could win. And he's living in a country that is solid proof that if you make it a liberal culture war about wokeness, here I am getting fired up again. But if you make it a liberal culture war about wokeness, that's not what it's about. But he's just too busy getting his orientation from king of the protest cage, Brian Becker, the protest hustler, Brian Becker, who just stages liberal rallies as a grift and isn't interested in spreading communism to the broad masses of people. I'll just throw this out there. Imagine, right? If you look at what we did with the Center for Political Innovation, what we did, right? With our meager resources, we had barely any money. We put on amazing conferences. We were mentioned in Newsweek. We did all of that. Could you imagine if PSL, with all of their money and all of their resources, could you imagine if they were knocking on doors all throughout America, in Kentucky and Iowa and Pennsylvania, talking to people about socialism and how socialism would make their lives better? Could you imagine how much better this country would be? If instead of staging liberal woke rallies around the trendiest liberal cause so Brian Becker can hustle more money, if they were doing what CPI would aspire to do, knocking on doors, winning average Americans to socialism, putting on conferences and educational seminars about actual Marxism and class struggle and breaking with wokeness, could you imagine how much better this country would be? But there's not as much money in that for old Brian, is there? Right? Brian's too busy hustling, the protest cage, right? And besides, all those people in Tennessee and Iowa and Kentucky, they're all white trash, right? Who cares about them? They're not woke. They're not trendy. They're not hip, right? They listen to country music. Some of them have never even been to Manhattan, right? Brian Becker comes from money. That's not a secret, right? And all these woke kids do. They're middle class, they're woke, and they hate the white working class. And Ben Norton hates the white working class. He hates the white working class. And that's why he can live in a country like Nicaragua. He can live in a country like Nicaragua and still think that culture wars is the issue, because culture war means white working class people are bad and woke hipsters that vote for the Democrats are good. I'm aware, and you're on the list. You're on the list. Don't worry, Andre. You're on the list, and I appreciate it. I'm definitely talking about that. They hate the white working class. And more than Ben Norton, Danny Haifeng very openly hates the white working class. Very openly, right? He says the white working class benefits from imperialism. The white working class is the enemy. And it's so easy because both of them have a grift. Both of them aren't doing the hard work. Ben's in Nicaragua. You know, Danny has a Patreon, and neither of them are doing the hard work of building a working class socialist movement, which is not easy, and holding a group together and dealing with people acting crazy and making crazy internet accusations and cancel culture. You know, it is dangerous and it's hard work to build a real organization and recruit real people from the broad masses to build socialism. And tailing wokeness to do an internet grift is easy. And no, I don't respect them more for doing that. No, and I don't respect how they then dump on me and they're involved in working against me because I'm actually trying to do it. And they've attacked me indirectly. I think Danny, I didn't even watch it, but didn't they have a podcast where Danny attacked me directly and was talking about cults and exploitation? And, you know, they dump on me when they are feeding into what the imperialists want. They're helping play workers against each other. They're grifting and they're tailing wokeness, and they're doing exactly the opposite of what needs to be done. And they're laughing all the way to the bank. There's a lot of money in it. Yep, they're raking in the money, right? It's a great way to grift money. The ruling class loves that. They are, whether they know it or not, they are a psyop to keep anti-imperialist people connected somehow to the wokes. That's what they're trying to do. And right now, wokeism is the main danger. Wokeism is U.S. imperialism's new mobilization, and we should be opposing wokeism. So there you go. All right. Do you believe in UFOs and life outside of Earth? Well, life outside of Earth, absolutely. The idea that this whole universe is just empty except for us. Yeah, there was life on Mars at one point, wasn't there? And I mean, there were like bacteria on Mars at one point. And yeah, I mean, the idea that we're the only planet with life on it. Yeah, I think that's pretty ridiculous. However, the UFO stuff, right? There were a lot of, all a UFO is, it stands for unidentified flying object. For, thousands of years, people have looked up in the sky and said, what's that? And sometimes it's a comet, and sometimes it's a weather balloon, and sometimes we don't know what it was. And so the idea that people have seen things in the sky that they can't identify and they don't know what they are, I don't find that to be too difficult, too absurd. That's whatever. The idea that they're aliens, not buying it. Not buying it. Don't believe in aliens. Don't think there's aliens. Don't think there's a big, men in black gonna drag you away in the middle of the night. Not into all of that. No, but the idea that people around the world and in the United States have seen things in the sky that are unidentified and they don't know what they are, that's pretty believable. And the Pentagon has admitted there's a lot of, they have a lot of information they haven't made public that during the Cold War, there was all kinds of weird experiments going on and, people flying spy planes over to the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union spying planes over here. And there was all kinds of stuff like that going on. So the idea that UFOs exist, not controversial. I think there's been many instances that are documented of people looking up at the sky and seeing something, not knowing what it was, and the idea that there might be life of some kind elsewhere in the universe, I think you can hang your hat on that. I mean, it's not human life. It'll be completely different, whatever it is. I think there was bacteria on Mars thousands of years ago, probably. And, there's other forms of life somewhere, probably, It's not little green men and they're not flying here on spaceships, but there's probably plants on some other planet or something like that. That's nothing that is too controversial. But the idea of, there's little green men flying around, there's alien abduction. No, don't buy it. Not buying it. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. Not buying it. But yeah, the UFO thing, the flying saucer thing, that started in 1947. As the Cold War was getting going, There was a widespread, panic across the United States of Americans thinking they saw flying saucers, and maybe there was some covert Cold War military operations we don't know about. I don't know what was going on, and we'll know someday, and we may not really know someday. Who knows? Who knows at the end of the day? I really don't know, but the idea that there's some kind of Men in Black, like the Will Smith movie, that's ridiculous. That I don't buy. That I do not buy. So there you go. There you go. All right. Now, Alec, this is the question about Greek politician Alex Spiros, who's now the wealthiest politician alive. This guy was the head of Syriza. Now, Syriza was the socialist group that was formed after the financial crisis in Greece. So in Greece, you've always had a strong communist party, the Greek Communist Party. And then you've also had a social democratic party in Greece that sometimes appeared to be much more radical. The leaders would wear Che Guevara t-shirts and quote Trotsky and stuff. And sometimes it appeared to just be lame and moderate. After the 2008 financial meltdown, there were widespread protests against austerity in Greece. And the Communist Party had very disciplined rallies where they would march with their red flags. It was their thing. And then there was this weird counterculture hippie opposition movement that was widespread. And there was a lot of sectarianism back then. The Greek Communist Party, they were their thing. And then everybody else, would do their thing. And the everybody else was often hippie, counterculture, new left stuff. And I remember during the Occupy days, so many of these, I used to call it Occuporn, but it was like these magazines they would give out at Occupy Wall Street that were anarchist. Every single one of them had a dig at the Greek Communist Party in it. The Stalinist, authoritarian, homophobic Greek Communist Party, right? Because the Greek Communist Party takes anti-imperialist positions. Now they don't support China, and they've gotten a lot worse in the last couple of years, but at the time they were one of the hardline Marxist-Leninist parties in the world, and they had a big following, a big percent, like 10% of the population votes for them in Greece. So at the time, the Greek Communist Party, every piece of Occuporn I was handed, all these glossy magazines that were like anarchists from Crime Think or whoever, they would hand out. All of them had a dig at the Greek Communist Party in them. All of them were like, and the Greek Communist Party is no good. The Greek Communist Party are just the same as fascists. So based on that, I started liking the Greek Communist Party. And at that point, my mindset, my worldview was very much almost like the way our friends at the CPGBML think. This idea that we just need to do what Stalin did. We need to stick with the 1930s Soviet ML Marxist-Leninist line, right? Because I saw that was constantly under attack and that these new left forces were attacking them. So when the upsurge of protests in Greece happened, and you had Alex Spiros and people from this old Social Democratic Party, they broke away and they formed a more radical version of the Social Democratic Party. They called Syriza. And Syriza was formed. And Syriza appeared to be a very radical group. And we were, all the Occupy literature, they all loved Syriza, and it was the new model, and it was great, and it was autonomous, and different wings of the left had a different say, and it was totally democratic. It was so great. It was just so amazing. Syriza. And then they got in there, and the people had a referendum voting against austerity, and then they passed an austerity budget. And they betrayed everything that the population that voted for them wanted. It was the most demoralizing thing ever. I mean, the whole reason they'd gotten elected is they were against austerity, and then they ended up implementing austerity. And at the time, the Communist Party refused to form a joint government with Syriza, because they said, no, we'd form a joint government. We would have to give our approval to austerity, and we ain't going to do it. Not going to do it. And everyone was attacking the Greek Communist Party for being so sectarian and so awful. Well, now it looks like the Greek Communist Party was right. The Greek Communist Party was right. They were right that Syriza was a fraud. And it was very well funded and very promoted. And I remember Alex Spiros, and I see you there. I'll write it down real quick. Alex Spiros, he came to New York City and he spoke at the Brookings Institute. And that's like a bourgeois think tank, like one of the main big money think tanks. And he gave a speech, and it began with him saying, "Have no fear, Greece will not turn into another North Korea." Basically saying, don't worry, I'm not really a socialist. I'm not really a Marxist. That's how he began his speech at the Brookings Institution, by saying, we will not turn Greece into another North Korea. And he didn't go to speak to activists or labor unionists or anything. He went directly to the ruling class to tell them what he was planning to do. And he got in and he implemented austerity. And it was hugely demoralizing. It was hugely demoralizing. And all this, and even the Workers' World Party that I was in, even they dumped on the Greek Communist Party. Oh my God, the Greek Communist Party is so sectarian and what? And they were right. The Greek Communist Party was right that they shouldn't have joined with Syriza, that Syriza was a fraud, that Syriza implemented austerity. They were right. Now, the criticism that people have made was, couldn't the Greek Communist Party have found a way to, to not make enemies out of the young people that were protesting that ended up voting for Syriza? Maybe. I mean, and maybe the Greek Communist Party is entrenched and bureaucratic, and I know they've taken some not good positions in recent months. They're not playing a good role in the international communist movement at this point. At the same time, I mean, they were better than the Syriza. Syriza was this social democratic woke fraud, and they called it what it was. And I actually, there was a leader of the World Federation of Trade Unions, which is the Communist Labor Federation. He was speaking in New York, and I asked him about Syriza. That's a whole story I can tell some other time, but, I asked him about it and he just gave an answer. He said, this is the Social Democrats. They've just reinvented themselves and they're anti-communist and they will end up implementing austerity. He was right. The Greek Communist Party, what they said about Syriza was correct. Now, on other issues, the Greek Communist Party has recently, moved in a bad direction, but the fact that this Alex Spiros guy is very, very wealthy, is that surprising? He's been rewarded. He maneuvered a situation where he was Mr. Marxism and Mr. Socialism. He had Yanis Varoufakis and all these people. He was the new face of socialism and Marxism, and he got in there, and people voted for him, and they got austerity. So, yeah, he was been handsomely paid for that. I'm not surprised. And the Greek Communist Party seems to have been, validated on that front at least. So, and I noticed that, there's a book called by David, who's the big Occupy guy, David Graeber, right? And he begins this book describing how, an event that I was at where like he rescued Occupy Wall Street from the Workers' World Party. And it's like so much of the Occuporn, it was all about how hardliners and Stalinists and Marxist-Leninists are not part of Occupy. Occupy has nothing to do with them. It's a new uprising of democracy, blah, 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 meaning that, it was opening the door. It was the beginning of wokeness, right? And that, if Occupy had been led by hardline Marxist, Leninists, and Stalinists, it would have been much better. Would have been a much better movement. But it was the fact that Occupy was this weird new left hodgepodge of confusion. That's why it was weak, and I was part of it. And if there's anyone who's qualified to say it, I was arrested in demonstrations. I was at the planning meetings that took place in Tompkins Square Park, the early General Assemblies, and I was, if anyone was involved in Occupy, it was me. There's video of me screaming about class against class at the first General Assembly on August 2nd. I'm there, I'm in all the documentaries. They show me with my long hair and my beard screaming about it. If there's anyone who's qualified to talk about Occupy, it's me. So, and I'll tell you that Yanis Varoufakis and the Syriza type thinking weakened the Occupy movement. There's a reason they wanted it to have no demands. There's a reason that they wanted it to just be vague, this vague outpouring of dissent. And there's a reason that it didn't lead to some kind of mass populist movement. And, it has a lot to do with that. And what happened with Syriza was very demoralizing, very, very, very demoralizing for the broad masses of people. And it resulted in weakening resistance. So I guess that's all I can say about that. So there you go, folks. All right, folks, it's been fun. I'm going to call it a night. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, Revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night, everybody.